But first, let's welcome our first guest, national best-selling author Chris Hogan. He has a new book out called Everyday Millionaires. Chris is also a mortgage and investing expert, and we're glad to have him back on the show, a true friend of the income generation. Chris, welcome back.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, we're talking about budgeting here. And the first step, though, isn't about what you need to do to have the proper budget or how to structure a budget. The first step is just to get a good, solid budget done. In your experience, roughly what percentage of people who are approaching retirement who are retired actually have prepared a budget?
Well, I can tell you this, David, far too few. Not enough people are doing it. They don't understand how important the budget is. I mean, it's the plan. I tell people it's the roadmap that allows you to understand where you're going and where you want to go. So it's a really vital, important piece of information, but it takes some time to get into practice of. I tell people it'll take you around 3 months to get budgeting down pat, but don't let that prevent you from starting and having an understanding of your income as well as all of your expenses.
Yeah, if you don't know what your goal is in terms of monthly expenditures, you can't hit it, right? You can't hit a goal that you can't see. But why is it that so few actually do it? Is it because they hate math? Or is it much deeper than that, as I suspect?
Well, I think, and talking to people in the over 20 years I've been dealing with money, I've really heard a lot of different stories, or as I like to call them, a lot of different excuses. But it really boils down to a couple of things. People either don't have the knowledge, and that means they don't know the steps or the process to go by, or they have fear. They're scared to do it because they've never done it before. And so it really boils down to people beginning to get the right kind of information and learning the steps to take. Like, it doesn't take a computer software to prepare a budget. You don't have to
Right.
have highfalutin, powerful computer. What you need is a pencil and a piece of paper and having knowledge of your numbers, your income as well as your expenses, and really sitting down and understanding this, David. I want you to tell your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. That's a quote by John
True.
Maxwell. I absolutely love it because what it does is it gives us back control. And when we have control, we can have confidence in what we're doing.
So part of it is maybe fear. They don't know how to go about doing the budget. They think it's more complicated. But do you think some people feel constrained by a budget and maybe baby boomers don't want to be constrained? Do you think that may be part of the issue, at least with the baby boomer generation or the income generation, as we've now come to call it here on Newsmax television?
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up because that's actually the third. That feeling constraints. A lot of people have told me that a budget feels like handcuffs. They go, Chris, I don't want to do it because it tells me what I can't do. And the reality is it's actually the opposite. When you have a budget, as my friend Rachel Cruz says, it gives you permission to spend. That means you're able to do something without the regret or without the fear in the background because you've allocated money aside to be able to do it. So now when you do that thing, you're able to enjoy it instead of feeling like you're going to have regret later or feeling buyer's remorse.
Yeah, so it sounds like control. On one hand, they feel like, oh, if I have a budget, something else is controlling me. But what you're saying is essentially, if you have a budget, then you're controlling where your dollars are going.
I think
So,
you're absolutely right. And it's so vital and so important because when people feel in control, they can keep their hands on the steering wheel, as I like to say. And so, really, it's a matter of understanding the budget is your friend and it's a living, breathing thing. You don't want to do a budget at the beginning of the month and just set it aside. We want to do the budget, but also make sure that you're checking in on it. Are you staying on track? Are you spending what you said you were going to spend? And it allows us to make adjustments midstream. And so it's a lot like in a game. I'm a former athlete. Every coach comes out and they have a game plan. But in the middle of the game, you have to make some adjustments based on what your opponent is doing.
right.
Well, in life will bring you some things. And so you need to be able to make adjustments. So keep your hands on your budget, stay in control, and then that way you can plan for things and not have things come up and surprise you.
Yeah, what was it? Mike Tyson who said, everyone has a plan until someone gets punched in the face. Was that him?
That is exactly right.
Yeah. And that's what happens sometimes. I think people set up a budget and then all of a sudden the furnace goes, or they have a leak in their roof, or they have a bigger repair on their automobile, and all of a sudden they blow their budget apart. And it's almost like the alcoholic, where all of a sudden, they don't drink for a month, they have that first drink, and all of a sudden they're off and running again. And I
No,
think
you're
that's what
right.
happens with a lot of people when they blow the budget the first time, they think it's all gone, and that's the end of it. So, Chris, can you stay with us, please? We need to take a commercial break. We're going
Absolutely.
to come right back. We're going to talk more about specific ideas that you might have for budgeting for people who are approaching retirement for those retirement years. And you stay with us too. We'll be right back here with more on the income generation. I'm David Scranton. Now it's time to welcome back national best-selling author Chris Hogan. Chris, thanks for sticking around.
Thank you.
So what do you tell people in situations like the one I just described before the break, where you've got this great budget, you stick to it month 3, month 4, all of a sudden month 5, boom, there's a big repair on your automobile, there's a repair on your home, and you blow your budget. What do you do in that case? What do you tell people to do?
Well, I tell people that number one, that's called life. If you haven't had a car repair in the last 6 to 12 months, you need to be ready, right? I mean, it's just something's going to happen. And so that's why I encourage people to have what I call an emergency fund. I want you to set aside 3 to 6 months of expenses. Just set it aside in a money market account. Keep it liquid so you can get to it, because it's not if life is going to happen, it's when.
Right.
And when you have an emergency fund, that emergency fund turns emergencies into simple inconveniences, because you don't have to panic and you don't have to blow your budget. So 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside, that will protect your budget and your peace of mind.
Great advice, absolutely great advice. It's the bedrock of any good financial plan, whether somebody's young and working or whether they're retired. So, speaking about retirement, all of our income generation members are either retired, retiring, or going to be retiring in the next decade. So now budgeting for a retired person is a bit different, and you've heard through earlier in the show monologues and the like how I recommend doing that. But what do you recommend? What are some tips that you could tell our income generation members who are preparing for retirement how to set their budget in the ideal way?
Yeah, well, I mean, the budget is going to be important regardless of what phase or stage of life you're in. I think having a plan and staying in control of your money helps your money to go further, and it also helps you to feel more in control. And so when people are retiring, and in my book, Retire Inspired, I talked to a lot of people, but they didn't realize, and they were shocked, David, that once they retired, their expenses actually went up. I told them, I said, it's not a surprise, because if you think about the week, the typical full week that we have, what days do people typically spend the most? It's typically Friday, Saturday, or Sunday.
On the weekends, right?
That's right. The more downtime we have is where we can tend to spend more. Well, when you're retired, every day is Saturday. And so again, coming back and having that plan is going to be really important. Again, it gives you permission to enjoy so you don't have to have regret.
So 30 seconds we have left in this particular segment here. Tell our income generation members, though, what particular challenges do you find for people planning for retirement when it comes to budgeting?
Well, I think the particular challenge they have is, number one, how much traveling and when are they going to travel? How much are they going to do? But then also gift buying. We tend to love to be able to buy for other people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't have some constraints around that, you can tend to overspend and cause yourself some grief.
Yeah, and especially people with grandchildren, it's hard to tell grandma she can't spend money on those grandbabies, and they get a little bit out of control. It's just what happens. It's human nature. We all do it. So, Chris, we need to take another break. We'll be back in just a moment. You stay with us. We'll be right back here with more on the income generation. I'm David Scranton. I'm here with Chris Hogan. We'll be right back. Now it's time to welcome back for one last segment, author, mortgage and investing expert, and good friend of the income generation, Chris Hogan. Thanks for sticking around one last time.
Thank you.
So, okay, budgeting is great, but what if I'm planning for retirement and I just can't fit the 7 pounds of stuff that I have to fit into the 5-pound bag, but I hate my job, I've got to retire, I just can't take it anymore? What words of wisdom do you have for people who are trying to control the budget and maybe shrink it down a bit to get it inside that 5-pound bag?
Well, that's a tough spot. Anytime you're looking at that and you're starting to feel the time crunch, I want people to understand when it comes to retirement, it's not an age, it's a financial number. So it's a matter of how much money you have put away for yourself and what you're doing with the income you're making right now. So I think the most important step to take is to prioritize your needs over your wants. And that's really understanding, where are we spending money? I talk about in my book, Retire Inspired, that we all have money leaks. We all have an area that we tend to overspend on, whether it's eating out or groceries or whatever it might be. We all have that. I think it's important for people to identify their money leak and start to make some adjustments. Understanding that when I redirect money, instead of eating out 6 nights a week, if I can scale that back to eating out 2 nights a week, I can
Sure.
redirect more money over into my Roth IRA.
And you might be a little bit healthier too, because you're not eating all that fat and cholesterol and sodium and all the stuff that's in restaurant food. So what if somebody retires and they have a mortgage, and they again, they're a little tight on cash flow, they want to control the budget. Any words of wisdom for that income generation member with the mortgage going into retirement?
Well, I would prefer people obviously to have their mortgage paid off prior to getting into retirement. But you're right. Some people have hit retirement and they still have a mortgage.
Right.
I say let's get committed and get focused on attacking that mortgage and paying that thing off. I mean, everyone can imagine how much more they could enjoy life and live life if that mortgage payment wasn't going to a mortgage company, it was staying with you. But if you have a mortgage, I want you to look at it. If you're on a 30-year, get refinanced into a 15. Understanding the power of that math, an extra $400 to $500 a month will allow you to attack that mortgage and eventually pay it off. Because the goal is not to buy a home, the goal is to own one. But I want people to avoid home equity lines of credit. Don't borrow against your home. You want to get that thing paid off and freed up for yourself.
How about reverse mortgages? If I'm in my late 60s, maybe 70, and I'm just too tired, I've got to get out of the workforce. What do you tell people about reverse mortgages? Some people say they're great. Some people say don't touch them. The truth usually is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Well, reverse mortgages can be a very tricky area. And I think it's important for people to go into it with their eyes wide open. In years past, they were so expensive, and the products were not anything that I would ever advise anybody on. I know they're making some changes and some tweaks. So I want people to be very aware of where they are, understand what they're doing and what they're getting into, and get the right kind of legal guidance. But we have to make wise decisions that put us in a better position. We want to do things that we're going to look back on in a couple years and love. For example, I started making 2-year decisions many years ago. That means I want to make a decision today that I can look back on in 2 years and be glad that I made that decision. So whenever it comes to your largest monetary asset, your home, I want you to go into a situation with your eyes wide open, but make sure you're getting the proper guidance.
I think it's important that you have long-term goals, but we get more motivated sometimes by short-term goals, that attaboy, that pat on the back. So we need to leave it there for today. Chris, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more here on The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton.